Ever get that feeling, you have this killer idea, like you just know it's going to be huge, but then, bam, everyone shoots it down.
It's almost like clockwork, right?
Yeah.
Or even better, you're in a room full of brilliant minds and somehow they miss the mark completely.
Exactly. And that's what we're diving into today, those overlooked breakthroughs, those ideas everyone dismisses as crazy, at least until they change everything.
We're talking about loonshots. And trust me, these aren't just your run-of-the-mill good ideas. We're talking about the kind of ideas that seem utterly bonkers at first glance, but have the power to reshape entire industries, maybe even the world as we know it.
And the best part, this isn't just some theoretical stuff.
We're diving into real-life examples, stuff you probably interact with every day, without even realizing it's the result of a loonshot breaking through.
It's true. And one of the best examples, at least from my reading of Safi Bahcall's book, has got to be the story of Richard Miller.
Oh yeah, Richard Miller, the oncologist. He had this radical new idea for treating cancer.
Imagine dedicating your life to fighting cancer, only to have your colleagues basically say your groundbreaking treatment is like unleashing a piranha in the body. Can you imagine being in that room? Talk about an uphill battle.
It just goes to show you, sometimes the most groundbreaking ideas are the ones that make people the most uncomfortable. What seems crazy on the surface could actually revolutionize an entire field.
And the craziest part of that story, that piranha treatment later sold for, get this, $21 billion.
Billion with a B.
It blows my mind. But it also makes you think, what if we're sitting on a gold mine of these loonshots, these game-changing ideas, but we're just not recognizing them?
And that's the key takeaway here, that gut feeling that tells you an idea is brilliant, even if it sounds a little wild. Don't ignore it. We're going to explore why those instincts are worth paying attention to and, maybe even more importantly, how to build an environment where those ideas can actually flourish.
Because let's be honest, I think there's a little bit of that loonshot potential in all of us. Speaking of crazy ideas, isn't it wild to think that radar, one of the most important technologies in World War II, almost got completely ignored?
It really highlights how even in a crisis, sometimes even a world war, the way an organization is structured can completely stifle innovation.
It's like they can't see the forest for the trees.
Exactly. A perfect example is the U.S. Navy in World War II. They had these brilliant scientists, the artists, developing this game-changing radar technology.
Right, but they were basically in a different universe from the soldiers, the military leaders, stuck in their old ways of traditional warfare.
It created this massive communication breakdown. You had these two groups, each doing their own thing, barely even aware of what the other was doing.
And no one thought to bridge that gap.
It was like each side was speaking a different language. The result, this revolutionary technology that could detect enemy aircraft from miles away was almost completely overlooked.
It's mind-blowing.
It really is. Imagine being so focused on the immediate threat that you miss a game changer like that. The soldiers just couldn't wrap their heads around it. It probably seemed like something straight out of science fiction.
Thank goodness for people like Robert Parsons, right?
Absolutely. He's the guy who wouldn't give up on radar. He kept pushing, kept advocating, basically went above and beyond to make sure the Navy finally understood just how powerful this technology could be.
What a champion of innovation. Seeing that kind of persistence is always so inspiring, even if it's in a history book.
Definitely. And his efforts paid off big time. Radar ended up playing a pivotal role in turning the tide of the war.
So what you're saying is these loonshots, they're not just relegated to some research lab or a tech startup.
Exactly. They can pop up anywhere. And the same kind of resistance that almost killed radar, well, that can happen in the business world too. Take 3M, for example.
Wait, 3M, the Post-it note and Scotch tape people, they're like the poster child for innovation, right?
You'd think so, wouldn't you? But even they fell into this trap.
Really? How so?
Well, they decided to implement Six Sigma. It's a system that's all about efficiency and eliminating errors. Sounds good on paper, right?
Sure. Who wouldn't want their company to be more efficient?
Right. But here's the thing. At 3M, this intense focus on efficiency, on the soldiers, those managers focused solely on metrics, basically suffocated the artists, those creative thinkers who were coming up with 3M's groundbreaking products.
So even a good thing taken too far can actually backfire.
It's all about balance. Innovation plummeted at 3M during that time. It wasn't until they eased up on the strict Six Sigma that they started seeing those breakthrough ideas again.
It's like that saying, you can't see the forest for the trees. They were so busy making sure everything ran perfectly that they missed the opportunity for something totally new.
Exactly, and that's just one example. Sometimes, though, it's not even about the organizational structure. Sometimes it's about overcoming these deeply ingrained assumptions, like with the story of statins.
Statins, those cholesterol-lowering drugs.
Yeah. Hard to believe now, but they were met with a ton of skepticism from the scientific community at first.
Seriously, my doctor practically begs me to take them. What happened?
Early studies on statins had what Bahcall calls false fails. It's basically when something seems to disprove an idea, but if you dig a little deeper, you find out it actually reveals some important lessons. Early studies, they were mostly on animals, and they suggested there might be some risks with statins. A lot of scientists were convinced they weren't safe for humans.
So don't be discouraged by a few bumps in the road or a bunch of skeptical scientists.
It takes guts to push forward when everyone else is saying no way, and that's where this idea of a loonshot nursery comes in.
Okay, color me intrigued. Tell me more about this Loonshot nursery. So tell me, how do we actually build this Loonshot nursery? Where do we even start?
Well, I think the first step is recognizing something called the Moses trap. It's this idea that a charismatic leader, often the founder of a company, can actually become a bottleneck for innovation.
Really? That seems kind of counterintuitive. I was that a passionate leader would be the perfect person to get behind these wild, out-there ideas.
You'd think so, right? But it turns out that when one person has all the decision-making power, it can stifle everyone else.
It's like that old saying, too many cooks in the kitchen.
Kind of, but in this case, it's more like only one cook in the kitchen. When that happens, people are less likely to speak up, less likely to propose anything that might go against the leader's vision, even if it's a brilliant idea.
So how do we avoid that?
Bahcall uses Edwin Land, the founder of Polaroid, as a prime example of this. He was a genius, no doubt. I mean, the guy invented the instant camera. But he was also super involved in these top-secret government projects.
No way. What kind of projects?
He was developing digital imaging for spy satellites, of all things.
Wait, hold on. The instant film guy was working on digital imaging. That's incredible. But if he was so gung-ho about digital imaging for the government, why didn't Polaroid jump on that?
And that's exactly the problem with the Moses trap. While Land was off revolutionizing things for the government, his own company missed the boat completely.
Wow. Talk about a cautionary tale. So how do we make sure we're not accidentally killing the next big thing?
Bahcall lays out 3 core rules for building a successful loonshot nursery. Rule number 1, separate the phases. Basically, you need to create separate spaces for the artists, those big picture thinkers, and the soldiers, those who are laser focused on execution. Let each group excel in their own way.
So different types of work, different environments. We can't expect those creative types to thrive while staring at spreadsheets all day.
Exactly. Give them the freedom to brainstorm, to experiment, to take risks. But, and this is crucial, there needs to be clear communication between those 2 groups. You've got to find a way to bridge that gap between the wild, crazy ideas and turning them into real, tangible products or services.
Separate the phases, but keep those lines of communication open.
Got it. What's rule number 2? Dynamic equilibrium. It's about building a culture that values both those small incremental improvements, the stuff the soldiers are great at, and the radical out there breakthroughs that the artists bring to the table.
Find that sweet spot where those 2 forces can coexist, maybe even complement each other.
Exactly. It's like yin and yang. You need both. And finally, rule number 3, critical mass. Make sure your Loonshot group has enough talented people and resources to gain some serious traction.
So it's not enough to just have a couple of bright minds stuck in a room somewhere. You need a real team with the momentum to power through those inevitable challenges.
You got it. You need to create an environment where those Loonshots have the space, the support, the critical mass to actually thrive.
Sure.
But it's not just about the people, it's about structure too.
That's where this whole magic number thing comes in, right?
Yeah. Yep. Bahcall's research shows there's a certain size, a tipping point, if you will, where organizations start to become less innovative. And you might be surprised at what that magic number is.
Okay, you're killing me. What is it?
For a lot of companies, it's around 150 people.
150. That's way smaller than I expected.
It's true, and it really makes you think maybe there's a point where the focus shifts from those big revolutionary ideas to something a little, shall we say, safer?
Less risk, less reward. So how do we combat that?
Bahcall offers a few strategies for raising the magic number.
Right.
One is to minimize the return on politics. Instead of rewarding internal maneuvering, prioritize those actual tangible outcomes.
It's about recognizing the people who are really in the trenches, making a difference, not just the ones who are good at climbing the corporate ladder.
It's about rewarding those who are actually moving the needle. Another thing is to embrace soft equity.
Soft equity.
Basically, it means recognizing those contributions that go beyond a paycheck. Things like peer recognition, giving people opportunities to grow and learn new skills, the chance to work on projects that really light their fire.
It's about creating an environment where people feel valued, challenged, and inspired.
Exactly. And finally, make sure you have a good project skill fit. When people are working on projects that align with their passions and expertise, that's when the real magic happens.
It makes perfect sense. But how does this all play out on a larger scale? What about nations, entire countries? How have they fostered this kind of loonshot environment?
It's a great question. Bahcall's whole idea of loonshot nurseries, it really comes to life when we look at history through that lens.
So walk me through it.
He uses the example of Tycho Brahe, a Danish astronomer.
I've heard the name, but remind me what he's known for.
He's considered one of the key figures in the scientific revolution. He made these incredibly precise astronomical observations. But here's the fascinating part. Bahcall compares him to a Chinese astronomer from roughly the same period, Shen Ku.
Okay, I'm not familiar with him.
He was equally brilliant, but he didn't have the same impact. Why? Because the system he was operating in was far more centralized, less open to those kinds of radical ideas.
So it's about more than just individual brilliance. It's about the environment.
Exactly. Think of it like a garden. You can plant the most amazing seeds, but if the soil isn't right, if they don't get enough sun, they'll never reach their full potential. You need to cultivate that environment where those seeds of innovation can take root and flourish.
So it's about finding and nurturing those fertile grounds for loonshots. That brings us to the real question, the one we should all be asking ourselves. What are the loonshot nurseries in our world? Those spaces where those game-changing ideas are allowed to take root and grow.
Are you plugged into those spaces? Are you part of a team, an organization, a community that embraces those wild ideas, those loonshots that just might change the world?
It's a call to action for all of us, to be champions for innovation, to seek out those loonshots and create spaces where they can thrive. Because who knows, that crazy idea you have that when everyone else dismisses it just might be the next big thing. This has been a fascinating look at loonshots. We've covered a lot of ground today. We talked about the power of these seemingly crazy ideas, the importance of building the right environment to nurture them, and even how to overcome those common obstacles that can stifle innovation. We hope you found this deep dive thought-provoking and maybe even a little inspiring. Thanks for joining us.